not too bad. And we are joined by lots of amazing special people who have a story to tell and then some. And so we're going to hear a little bit about it today. I'm just going to give a brief overview and hand it over to the folks who really worked on this, who made it happen, and also who have generations of lived experience here in New Mexico. And so today we're here to honor the legacy of the first African American families to homestead in New Mexico. And it's been a long time coming. I know as I look around this room, many of you have mentioned how can we share this story officially and appropriately in the state of New Mexico and the city of Albuquerque. And at least as Mr. Poudrell and I were talking about this morning, at least this is a slice. We know there's much more, and we want to have much more. And I continue to be committed to having a full African American culture and history museum. But we've got a really good slice that we're going to share with you today. And so it's getting us started, and it's this exhibit behind me. We're going to talk about how it works. But for us, this is part of acknowledging that Black history is also our history. It's part of New Mexico history, and it's part of Albuquerque history. And that so often has not been told. And this is the beginning of institutionalizing us telling that story going forward. And so we need to share the history with each other, and we need to share it now, and you can do that right here at Electric Playhouse. So this exhibit, which is mobile, it's going to be able to be moved from venue to venue, and I think that's really important so that it can show up in all sorts of places, whether it's an exhibit at the State Fair, whether it's in our museums, or whether it's in places where families go, like Electric Playhouse, so we can share this with everyday people as they're going about enjoying the city of Albuquerque. And the history of these families, it's a history of ingenuity, perseverance, and of course of family lineage. You are going to see here today and also learn about in the exhibit descendants of those original homesteaders who are still with us right here in the metro area. And so this is a sneak peek of a cutting-edge mobile installation created in partnership with the African American Museum and the Cultural Center and the Electric Playhouse. And it's the first step in what eventually I believe will be housed at an Albuquerque museum, whether it's the Albuquerque Museum itself in the meantime, or it's when we finally get a standalone facility to tell our broader history. Now, I want to introduce a woman who, from the minute I met her, she brought this up and never stopped. And so Rita Poudrell, she's the executive director of the African American Museum and Cultural Center, and she's going to share the historical significance of this. Of African American homesteading here. But, you know, Rita, I just want to thank you. I remember when we first sat down and I said, you know, we had a vision, and I said also, let's find a way to actually take a step forward together, a meaningful step forward, not just asking for funds or not just saying someday we'll have X, Y, or Z. And this is that step. This is a meaningful step to everything you've been working for so long. So Rita, come on up.
Thank you, Mayor. So, on behalf of the African American Museum and Cultural Center of New Mexico, we are really excited about this upcoming exhibit. It's called Facing the Rising Sun. It's about the journey of African American homesteaders in the state of New Mexico, and it's about their use of vision, belief, and sovereign ownership to achieve their goals. Under the Homestead Act, I don't know if you're familiar, but under the Homestead Act of 1862, from 1863 to 1976, citizens who had not, if you were 21 years of age, and if you hadn't taken up arms against the United States, you were able to homestead 160, 320, and eventually 640 acres of land for a minimal fee and for just staying on the land and improving it over a 5-year period of time. So Electric Playhouse collaborated with us and said we need to make this an interactive exhibit that can be touched, that will pull young people into this history. And as the mayor said, the city of Albuquerque and the Albuquerque Museum agreed to give us the space to make this history visible, which it so deserves. And African Americans were already coming west in the late 1800s. And you had the Buffalo Soldiers, but most African Americans were coming west resisting the oppression of Jim Crow and resisting the terror of the Ku Klux Klan and the red shirts. So homesteading and the vision of land ownership was the vision of having places of sanctuary, places of self-determination, self-definition, places where hard work and perseverance could mean that you were able to support a family, and places to continue resistance, where the legacy was not just the land, but to be forever vigilant, to know your worth, and to resist with all your heart and soul, diminishing your God-given right to equality and freedom from injustice. And homestead were part of the foundation of these thoughts of resistance. African American history gives a unique slant on the history of New Mexico. As Jim Crow laws became a part of the New Mexico landscape. So American homesteaders were at the forefront of the fight to end segregation in New Mexico schools, to end redlining by the banks and unequal access to capital, to establish fair housing laws, and to end real estate covenants. The ongoing fight for our history to be visible in our schools was another fight that we are still fighting, and to have a standing structure as a place of sanctuary for our history. The history of African American homesteading is a history with continual movement. It is Sankofa. It embraces the past, the present, and the future. Homesteaders are not dead. They continue. And it's my honor today to acquaint you with our griots, our storytellers. They are remarkable. They are the descendants of visionaries. They are to be honored as jewels of New Mexico. My husband calls it black turquoise. They, as James Weldon Johnson wrote, they sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. They sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. They face the rising sun as a continuation of resistors, revolutionaries who have held fast to the belief that all men are created equal and have refused to be defined by others as any less than that. So I'm going to introduce these three remarkable people, and they're going to each just give a short story of homesteading. So we have, sitting in the chair, Mr. Grover Pettis. He's a second-generation homesteader from Las Cruces who followed his father's visions to fulfillment and who still holds part of the family homestead, which is now into the fifth generation. We have Mrs. Bobby Boyer, who's from Vado, a third-generation landowner, and she married a third-generation homesteader, Mr. Roosevelt Boyer, who will give us a sense of community that arose through the power of ownership. And we have Mrs. Brenda Dabney Ballou. She's a fourth-generation homesteader from Albuquerque, New Mexico, whose mother brought a homestead vision to fulfillment at the age of 29. So I thank you all for being here, and I'm going to, it's my honor to start with Mr. Grover Pettis.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be here to say something about the homesteading of Las Cruces, New Mexico, in which my dad was somewhat of a visionary. And he, years prior to this thing happening, my dad had saw a vision of a piece of ground that perhaps he had never seen or never heard of before, but was taken out and shown some land that was to be some homesteading land. And of course, my dad, the gentleman that took him out there and began to show them around. They had several people that went out there and they showed them this part and that part and all of the things there that they had. And my dad had had a dream about a piece of property, but he didn't know where it was or what it was. Nevertheless, when we got to this portion of land there, Section 11, it is named, for the first time he had seen it visually. And when we got to that piece of property, my dad said, "Oh, that's mine. That's my piece of property that I saw in a dream." And he says, "Yeah, that's the one that I saw. And that's the one I saw water that was running underneath the ground there. I know there's water there," he said, "because I saw it in a dream." So I'm going to kind of demonstrate just a little bit of something that I'm sorry I can't tell you the whole story because I can't say it all in a short period of time. But I'm going to just show you just a little bit of how we found the water and know that there was water underneath there. So my dad had a little bit of experience with peach limbs. And for instance, this be a peach limb and it's drawn like a Y if you want to look at it and say, yeah, that's a Y, you know. Nevertheless, he says, well, let's see if we can find some water here. So he grabbed it by the ends of one like that, and then he twisted it up like this, and he says, well, let's see. If there's water there, this thing is going to bend over like that, and I can't hold it. So he says, okay. As he was walking along across a piece of land, and all of a sudden, this thing started just going down by itself. And it was just very tight, very twisting in his hand. In other words, he could not hold it until it got down like that. And he says, well, there's water underneath there. I know there's water there. So he says, I'm going to go to the other side of it and see what happens. So as he went toward the other side, it started coming back the other way. As they were leaving the water. And there was no way he could hold it. So this is just a little bit of a demonstration of how my dad used to find water when he was out on this Section 11. And I wish I could tell you a whole lot more about it, but that's the place that Mom and Dad finally became homesteaders out there, and that's where we had to go out there and do a considerable lot of work, fencing and digging, perhaps water holes for animals, cows, to drink water. because that was open land out there at one time. There was a lot of cattle, a lot of cowboys in that portion of the section out there. So there's a lot of things I could tell you about it. I wished I could tell you more about it, but my dad was a visionary, and that's where we got started. That's where we got started. I wished I could tell you a lot more about it, but that particular piece of land at one time was sold. Pop sold 240 acres of that land and bought a piece of land over on Highway 70, going out to Alamogordo, toward Alamogordo, the mountain, and he bought 407 acres out there. And that's where things really start happening. In other words, that piece of land, Section 11, started something that he had no idea what it was going to be like or what it was going to be like, but he saw that one thing. He saw that river going down through this particular section, and that piece of property is part of it, would enable us to buy a piece of property on the Section 14, which is near Highway 70. And that's where I began to have a vision of what it looked like and what it could look like if we had water on that land. And I wandered around that place out there after working around town, I started at the base working for White Sand Improvement Ground. So nevertheless, I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I see something in this land, but I can't see it without water. I don't know how long I have to speak here, how long. So if I wished I could tell you the whole story, but since I cannot do it at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
And we are going to tell the whole story when the exhibit opens in January.
Let's go forward there. Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to have Ms. Boyer come up. She's a resident of Vado.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I have a big voice, as you can see, and so I don't think you'll miss any words that I say. Okay, what I'm going to tell you about is Vado, New Mexico. It was predominantly a black town. You talking about a beautiful place to grow up in? I don't care what anybody says. It was beautiful. I enjoyed all of my years. And I would do you like I do the kids that I teach, but I won't go that route. I always say, guess how old I am? And they would come up with all these funny ages. Every once in a while, somebody would come up with 100. I said, wait, guys, Miss Boy isn't that old. She isn't 100 years old. So my part that I'm going to tell you about Vado, like I said, we had a very nice community. The people came from the South, because they wanted to come for better lives and everything. And does anybody know what Vado means? Okay, it means like a crossing in the river. So that's how Vado got its name. So if because a lot of people always ask me what it is, and that's what it means. I've researched and found that out. Okay, now my part of the speech today, I'm going to tell you about one thing that the black people in New Mexico, which a lot of people didn't realize, we celebrated Juneteenth. I can guarantee you that our celebrations were bigger than the ones that they did down south. Because the simple reason, there were black people in El Paso. They would come up on Juneteenth. There were black people in Las Cruces. They would come up on Juneteenth. Now, I want you all to know, no matter what you were doing that day, no matter what your job was that day, everybody took off. They told their little bosses or whatever, we're going to the Juneteenth celebration. And it was held at Dunbar, I've lost the man's first name. Anyway, Dunbar Elementary School at the time. It was a school at the time. It's now a community, known as our community center in Vital. And I'm the vice president. Anyway, this is where we all gathered, and there was so much unity among the black people in New Mexico because it was nothing but happiness. And we had some good people who barbecued. Now, my cousin, his grandfather, he was excellent. And our sheriff, he was excellent, and he barbecued. And of course, the ladies, you know what they did. They brought their favorite dish. And so we would just eat, and we'd have games, and the kids would play, and we'd have so much fun. And this went on for years before they even started their celebration in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Everybody was down there with us. And it was a grand time. Every year we had a grand time. I hated to see it leave, but, you know, everything has to change. And Vado, just like Vado has changed. But I can truly say this much, that I have enjoyed it so much, living there. And my little schoolhouse, where I went, it is on the National Historical Record. Y'all ought to give me a hand. Now, I'm not up here to tell you all about Vado because I could go on and on and on. But I told somebody the reason why Bobby Jean Fuller Boyer is up here is because my husband, Roosevelt Boyer, Jr., he was very interested in all of this type of thing. And one of the cameramen, we're going to give him a yell out. 19 years ago, he came to our home, and he did an interview with my husband. That's how long we have been interested in that, and I will be interested in that until my last days.
Okay. And our last storyteller is from Albuquerque and homesteading in this part of the state.
Good morning. Good morning. And to our mayor and all distinguished guests here. There was a little girl whose mother dressed her up real pretty one day, dressed her in her Sunday best and her little brothers, because it was a special day. The East End edition, A Dream Realized, was going to have its grand opening in the northeast section of Albuquerque. There's a story behind that Dream Realized. A group of African-American businessmen had a dream for their community. Yes, Albuquerque was their community. About 1938, they had a land vision of developing a homestead plot into a real community of homes and schools and parks and hospitals and shopping centers and more. They plotted and they planned. A 16-year-old young African-American girl became their secretary. Their dream was embodied in her, and in years to come, she would be charged with seeing that dream become reality. The strength of that dream kept her looking for all avenues of financing, and many avenues. The local banks were closed to her. They were very unreceptive and uncooperative. The strength of that dream would eventually lead her to an African-American contractor, Mr. J.S. Jones out of Arizona. The strength of that dream would finally would finally lead to homes being constructed, homes that would allow local African Americans to have new and decent housing. The strength of that dream finally had its grand opening. That was the day that my mother dressed me up in all my finery for that special occasion. It was, even though it was out in the boonies and the roads to get there were made of stone and dirt, it had started, the homes were ready to be looked at and to be shared with the community. She had competition from other land developers. She opened with 3 models and the first home, and when the first home was purchased, the East End Addition was on its way to becoming a thriving community. This was a dream realized. That young woman was my mother, Mrs. Virginia Ballou, and my grandfather, Henry Yeakley, was one of those African American businessmen. That was the reason for all the celebration on that beautiful, sunshiny, little windy day. I remember the balloons flapping in the wind and the flags flapping and the music playing and all there was plenty of food. My mother had a barbecue business and there was barbecue being shared that day. It was a festivity day. So it was a dream that was finally realized. Thank you.
I can introduce you. All right, so thank you so much for those amazing stories. And of course, I have questions for each of you, and such a thirst after being teased by some of that to hear more. And also, of course, we'll get to learn more about it in the exhibit. But this is a very special occasion, and so we do have some other folks who help make this happen, and we want to allow them to share a few words. And next up, Electric Playhouse, for those of you who don't know, is a wonderful thing in our city. We are out in the west side of Albuquerque, and it's fun for all ages, but I think you will see it is quickly going to demonstrate how it can scale, whether it's in Albuquerque or whether it's all over the country, and provide a great community space for families and a place that can feature the connection between art, technology, and fun. And so with more on this, Brandon, I can't remember your last name. Garrett, Brandon Garrett. Come on up. And you're the CEO?
Yeah.
CEO of Electric Playhouse. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming out. I'm CEO and one of the co-founders of Electric Playhouse. And if you may have been noticing a lot of dings and whistles in the back, so if you haven't been, as the mayor mentioned, it's an interactive space. We interact with the walls and floors into kind of gameable and art surfaces. And so what we like to do is take that technology and also bring it to museums, cultural clients, and businesses as well, just like in this example here. So this was a very special project. Just as you've heard the stories today, we have the pleasure of listening to these daily, on our weekly meetings. And Rita's a great storyteller, and we just love listening to her every time. And what was fun about this project was taking something from the past and the importance of what it means today and translating that into a physical piece. And so what we did was we took kind of what looks like a homestead here, but we filled it with that technology. So from a distance, you'd recognize that it's somewhat historical, but the magic is actually built into this. So you'll be able to explore all the different stories that have been kind of spoken, and it's actually designed to take on more stories because it's not all here. And so over time, this exhibit and what you experience within it is going to change and evolve. And so I had the pleasure to kind of work with the team early on to kind of conceptualize this. But I'd like to introduce Eric Yeakley. He's our Chief Technology Officer and also Project Manager on this. So he took this from concept to reality.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. So what can I tell you? So there's a documentary that you see on the outside of the screen, and then there's a touchscreen application on the inside that allows you to explore the different families that we're focused on in this exhibit. And then on the far side, we have what we're calling the time door. So the idea is that as you open the door, you're looking inside of the structure, and that changes through time. So there's displays there as you open that, and then you also look out on the lands. So as you're inside the homestead, you're looking out on the land, and the land changes too as you open that door. So you're coming up from the early 1900s up through present day. So it's very much still a work in progress. So we're looking to target opening in January, and really want to thank Rita. It's been an inspiration to work with you, and I knew basically nothing about homesteading in New Mexico, and that's one of my favorite things about working on projects is just the education that I get and that we get to help bring to the visitors that are going to be able to experience this exhibit. So I want to thank our team, especially early on, Teresa Kitt, Chris Steinmetz, Brandon Garrett, as I mentioned, and then our fabricator on this was Owen Schwab, and then I did the project management and also the software development on this, and then Jordan Tate. I don't know if Jordan was able to make it today, but he's our graphic designer. So really a fantastic team effort, and again, thank you, Rita, and thank you all the family historians that have helped bring the story to life. And yeah, all right. Thank you.
Wonderful, and a great example of what Electric Playhouse brings to our community. And I just want to reference their work at the Blue Museum is also awesome, and you can just get a feel for sort of how their technology and what they're doing can apply to museums and education of all kinds. So we want to really wrap up with a little bit, just because the city played a wonderful role in this in partnership with everyone that you've heard. And I know that when I will tell you the story of kind of how this started. So Rita has a meeting with me and others, and we rehash the same request she's had for decades. And I walk out of there, and this was probably 3 years ago, maybe almost 4 years ago. And I really wanted to find a way to somehow tell this story appropriately and permanently. And so the logical next call for me is our Arts and Culture Department. And so fortunately, with their leadership, our director, Shel Sanchez, and our deputy director, Hakeem Bellamy, and we went through the history of different museums and different attempts in different locations. And wonderfully, Hakeem, what she does a lot, kind of put some things together. Hey, why don't we use technology? What about things like Electric Playhouse? Why don't we try and start with a sliver of African American history like homesteading, that we can digest and actually get done. And so he really drove this project after I came in and said, we need a champion to actually get this done. And so it's a credit to his leadership. So Hakeem, come on up. Yeah.
We here, y'all. Thank you, Mayor. I'm lucky. Mayor Keller, Dr. Shel Sanchez over there. Wave at him, Shel. I'm lucky to have supportive bosses, and I know that I've been in the community. This is my community. I've been living in Albuquerque for 16 years now. I've lived here. The only place I've lived longer is where I grew up in South Jersey, so the black community here is my community. And so when I heard Rita, like Mayor said, saying with this administration, and hearing her say with previous administrations that, our stories have to be told and we need a place to tell them, I sort of always also thought of it in a very brick and mortar kind of way. And though, as you heard the mayor say, that his administration is still committed to helping us find a home, we also knew that the stories can't wait. Like, we can't wait till we find a home to tell our story. We'll always be waiting. We'll always be waiting for some other thing for our story to be added to the canon of New Mexico history. So Shel, after we left that meeting with Mayor, Shel was like, we were thinking about buildings and community centers and locations and libraries. And then, it was really, Shel was like, you should take Rita to Electric Playhouse. And I was like, why? And this was the central location. And she's like, I think we just need to figure out a way to think out, no pun intended, but outside the box, like a building. And we went down there, and I knew what at the time what Electric Playhouse could do. Obviously, they've done so many great, big, huge, amazing things since, but hadn't thought how it would really, really tie in to what the story Rita was wanting to tell first. And we stood in that, if you've been there, it's the four walls and projections, and we were kind of standing in there, and I think Electric Playhouse had just done a video release party, and had shown like the mesa and its vastness, and it's something you can only kind of do in 4D. You can stand in the middle, you can look around and be like, oh wow, I feel like I'm standing in a mesa. And as we stood there, we were like, wouldn't it be cool if the young people could stand in the middle of a space like this and look out a window and feel like they were in the middle of a homestead? And Rita gave the numbers, 600 acres, 300 plus acres. I was like, I'm 42 and I don't even know what 1 acre feels like. So I was like, so imagine if we could actually translate that to these young people, and it would mean something different, like what these families, these stories we heard, what these ancestors to them had taken on. And maybe, maybe you pay more attention when you figure out how huge the mountain was that they had to climb. And so that was like the seed. And then, we had more meetings with Electric Playhouse. We obviously had to come and present to the administration. Lawrence is in the back there. We presented to Lawrence and Mayor, and they were like, cool, when do we start and how much? And so they're the ones that kind of made the money happen. We made the meetings happen. Electric Playhouse came in with a whole lot of enthusiasm. And as you heard Eric say, just curiosity for this story. They were like, we know it's important and we don't even know why yet, but we're going to help y'all tell this story. And so to see it standing here and to see what it could do to really transform our young people's sense of self and integrity and that they belong here, right? It's not our 40-acre and a mule that was promised by the federal government. It's not the land grants that have been promised to other communities here in the state, but it was what we had, and businesses were started and families were started, and those people, those descendants are here with us today and evidence of that today. So thankful to everybody that made it happen. I really want to say to the families that are here today, you all are the resource, right? Mr. Poudrell said black turquoise. You're the resource. You are the precious gem. But we can't get you in every single classroom, right? You have lives. You have other things to do. And we can't have you speaking on loop at the Albuquerque Museum. But this can be in the Albuquerque Museum for 3 months. And young people can come and go and get those stories. So we kind of capture them so that they can be accessible and on demand to our young people. And of course, the non-black youth who also need to know these stories and know that it is integral to their New Mexico history. So we want to thank you for being willing to share your stories with us. Oftentimes the government says we're here to help and people run the other way. Y'all ran towards us, so we appreciate that. And just thank you, Rita, for your leadership and persistence. I want to thank my team, the Department of Arts and Culture. It was really a team effort. It wasn't just Shell and I. Our Albuquerque Museum is represented by our curator of history, Leslie Kim, over there. Leslie was in these meetings, which also lends credibility that our story, like if it's in the Albuquerque Museum, formerly of Art and History, then we're part of New Mexico history. So thank you, Leslie, for taking the lead on that. To Cindy Garcia, who was at the museum, and now we stole our way to City Hall, who's our administrator of museums, just helping to make sure that this project continues to move forward. Our museum director, Andrew Connors, can't be here because he's at a Board of Trustees meeting because we're all still on the clock in here. And thank you for Tanya for making today happen. She's our PIO, our marketing professional in our department. And to our GOV-TV team. Rita, give me Thomas's last name again. It's Williams. It's Thomas. Thomas, right there. Thomas, right? I say Thomas. Thank you, Thomas Williams. The documentary is Thomas Williams. So let's say that. The documentary is Thomas Williams. And that was in the works long before we partnered to make this a possibility, but it was great because they had already kind of head start on gathering the story. So thank you, Thomas. And to our GOV-TV team, who's also here because they're always at press events, but also by providing support there. And yeah, it really was a team effort. Electric Playhouse, you always knock it out the box. Thank you, John Mark, Brandon, Eric, Teresa. And what else am I supposed to say? I'm supposed to say why partnerships work. This was Mayor's lead in. He set him up and I didn't knock it down. But the idea is that we couldn't have done this alone. Like the city couldn't just do it, right? And then oftentimes people look to the city to fix it or make it happen. We can bring the people together who can make it happen, and this is a great example of that. We can instigate it, we can finance it, and then
So what let's do is let's connect with each other and also connect with our past. And we want to invite everyone to enjoy both Electric Playhouse and the exhibit. Thank you so much for coming.
Exactly.